Hello, writer. Today we are talking about dialogue. Dialogue is a really crucial part of any novel, and I'm going to tell you why that is. But so many authors find it really hard to write great dialogue. That's because they know how important dialogue is to the story. They're afraid of getting it wrong, and there are a lot of rules to writing dialogue that are completely different from the rules that govern other types of writing. So today I'm going to talk about why dialogue is so important, what makes for good dialogue, what dialogue must do if you don't want it to completely fail and fall flat. And then I'm going to give you 9 weird little tips that are really different from the tips that you use for any other kind of writing or activity, so that you can learn how to write fantastic dialogue as well. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Click on that little bell button so that you will be alerted whenever a new video comes out. I'm Karena Akhavein. I'm the founder of Spalmorum. I'm a literary coach, PhD in literature, whose mission in life is to take you from aspiring writer to successful author. And I do that by delivering smart, bite-sized chunks of information, inspiration, and motivation to help get you there. Okay, let's start up. So dialogue. Why is dialogue so important in any novel? First of all, dialogue breaks up long expanses of narration, and long expanses of narration can be a little bit boring. You know, like if you have too much expository writing or too much just plain description and nothing much is happening, that can really put a reader to sleep. It's a snooze fest. So you put in that dialogue to help you with the texture of your writing and also to help you with the pacing of your book. So since your dialogue is meant to be breaking up these long sections, keep in mind that your dialogue should be kind of snappy, to the point, and not too long in and of itself. It shouldn't go on for page after page after page. So I will touch on a little bit more of that just a little bit later, but keep that in mind. Dialogue is also super important because it helps to establish a mood in your story, and it'll do that by kind of showing the mood or the interaction between characters. In this, it also helps you to get to know your characters so much more because you see them having an actual relationship with somebody and actual interactions with someone, and also you might get a sense of more tension in that interaction, and that in and of itself is very interesting and really tells you much more about a character. You can also get some of the backstory details or some of the secrets or whatever that need to be exposed without having to do too much of the backstory in expository writing, which I've said many times before in many of my videos that is a bad idea. So putting it into dialogue is a great idea, but there's some caveats about that, and I'm going to be touching on those in just a minute. So that's what good dialogue, that's the reason it is so important. But what makes good dialogue? Well, there are some very hard and fast rules about what dialogue must do, okay? Dialogue absolutely 100% must move your story forward. This means that dialogue is going to move your story towards the climax or the conclusion. And if it doesn't do that, if nothing is happening in your dialogue that's actually moving that story forward, you're going to need to either delete or rewrite. It's as simple as that. Also, if your dialogue does not have tension, some kind of tension between your characters, you are going to rewrite that so that it does. That is because every single dialogue needs to tell the reader something about the character. They need to learn something in the dialogue that they did not know before this part of the book came along. So if your dialogue isn't showing you something about the characters or the relationships, delete or rewrite. Okay, so enough with the hard and fast rules. Let me give you my fun little weird tips that might be very different from the usual tips that we give for most types of writing. Number 1, don't keep it real. What? Usually you're told to make your writing very realistic, to be able to express everything, the sights, the smells, to make readers feel like they're right there by describing things in a very realistic way. Well, with dialogue, I don't mean that you shouldn't make it realistic, but I kind of do. Basically, you know how you can have a conversation with your friends and you're going to be talking about what you had for breakfast, and you're going to be repeating yourself, and you're going to be having all these, interruptions, and you're going to say, like, and you're going to, interrupt to talk about something completely unrelated, and then you're going to go back to it, and you're going to contradict yourself. all of those things are not very interesting for your reader, and they're also confusing for your reader. And we want to remove any barriers to comprehension. So you want to make your dialogue kind of realistic in a way, and I'll touch on how to do that in a minute. But you also want to take out anything that is going to not be crucial. So that means boiling it down to the essential piece. Cut out the fluff, cut out the stammering, cut out the circular discussions. You know what I mean. You know you gotta do it. Every single line must have a purpose. In life, we have small talk, not in your dialogue. Also, in real life, a lot of your friends in your friend group are gonna start sounding kind of the same or similar. In your dialogue, in your book, you can't have that. Every character must be completely distinctive so that your reader kind of recognizes them. They have to have a way of expressing themselves that is unique to them so that we can recognize them as readers. Number 2, be predictable. Predictable, what? Is that boring? No, in this case, predictable means that the reader needs to be able to recognize your character, i.e., your character should, if they start out all sarcastic, for example, they shouldn't in the next conversation be mushy and lovey-dovey. That is super confusing to your reader. So you need to have your characters expressing themselves in ways that are predictable and that are consistent throughout your book. And if there's some kind of character growth that happens, that means that there's a change, you need to make that gradual enough that your reader doesn't get confused by it. Tip number 3, forget being honest, forget being straightforward, and forget having attention to detail. What? Yeah. You want to leave some things out of your dialogue. You want to have your characters not necessarily being truthful. You want them to omit certain crucial details that the reader knows they're omitting. That's super important. Or that the reader will find out that they omitted. And in terms of attention to detail, the dialogue is not the place to have a long conversation asking for somebody's number, for example. That is so boring. So you want to find shortcuts to kind of jump people past those moments that are not super fascinating and that aren't super useful. Find a shortcut to express that and then jump back into your dialogue. Think about dialogue like you think about action in your book. In an action scene, you're not going to say, she jumped into the car, closed the door, buckled her seatbelt, put her hand on the wheel, turned the key in the ignition with the other, put the car in reverse, put her foot on the accelerator, looked behind her. Like, no, you're gonna cut it down to the significant parts that express that she is booking it out of there. And the same goes for your conversation in your dialogue. Number 4, forget the rules of grammar. Okay, there's one exception. You can't forget the rules of punctuation where it comes to punctuating your dialogue, and I'm going to tell you more about that. However, you can have partial sentences. You can have prepositions at the end of a sentence. You can have ways of speaking that aren't, correct or even elegant. And I think that you can forget about having a super rich vocabulary because in real life, people don't have an action scene where they're using SAT words, and they don't have a love scene where they're describing things in, all of this gory detail. So you need to use language that would be appropriate to the actual situation and forget using your fancy words, which you can use in your description somewhere else so that people know that you're super smart, but they also know that you're using your smarts in the right way. Also, I know you know so many synonyms for said, but at the end of your dialogue is not the place for them. You can just say either said or leave it out altogether and have some kind of description that shows how your character intends to express what they're saying. So that's super important. Basically, the reader will skip over said pretty easily, but another word that's a little bit less common or that's a little bit heavy, they're going to kind of stumble on, and that is not what you want. You want your reader to kind of be flying through your dialogue very naturally. Rule number 5, play favorites. I know you've been told not to play favorites on the playground or with your kids, that would be awkward, or with your pets, but in dialogue, definitely play favorites. Dialogue means 2 people. So really the ideal number of people to be speaking is 2. If you need to have a third kind of jump in to interrupt or do something, that's fine, but the majority of dialogue should be between 2 people and between 2 important people. So you want to not have dialogues between secondary or tertiary characters. You want to, just like I said, to kill off characters that aren't super important so that you can focus on what's important. That goes for dialogue as well. So make sure that you only have dialogues between these people that you deem important. That way your readers will know that they are important as well. Here's another funny little tip that is also kind of a playground tip of don't play well with others. What do you mean don't play well with others? What does that mean? I mean that your characters should not play well with others in that their dialogue is often going to be full of tension. They're going to be having disagreements, arguments, things where the tension is kind of underrunning. Because if your characters are having a dialogue where they're completely in agreement with each other and they're just, oh, I agree with you. Oh yeah, that's great. Oh, that's so good. You're so right. You're so right. I love you. I love you too. You're awesome. That doesn't move your story further at all. And it doesn't tell you much about your characters. So you need to have that tension or that, animosity even, so that your characters are more clear and that the action moves forward and that you move closer to climax or resolution. Here's another funny little tip. Interrupt yourself. Yeah, I know interrupting is rude, but you can do this. These are characters that you invented, so you own them. So you can totally interrupt yourself. You can interrupt sentences. You can use dialogue to cut into the action and use action to cut into the dialogue as needed for your pacing. Here's another tip. Talk to yourself. Oh, I know that everybody says that talking to yourself is kind of weird and you shouldn't do it in public. But when you're writing dialogue, it's a great thing to read it back to yourself so that you can tell whether it rings true, whether it rings kind of realistic when you read it. Like, would somebody actually speak that way? Yes or no? The best way of being able to tell that is by reading your dialogue out loud. And you will very soon know whether you have this super cringy, awkward thing that you wrote, and you'll be able to correct it or delete it. My last funny little tip is don't be original. By this, I mean be conventional, especially with your punctuation. You can be original in other things. However, don't completely defy how people normally speak, and also don't defy how people use the punctuation involved with marking your dialogue. So the quotation marks, where they go, the period, the exclamation point, line breaks, all of that should really follow the guide for what's routinely accepted, because if you don't do that, your reader is going to get confused as to who's speaking, who finished speaking, are they still speaking, what's next. You really want to mark things very clearly so that they know exactly what's happening, because you don't want any obstacles to comprehension in your book, because that cuts down on enjoyment. Okay, you guys, I think that that's the most important little tips when it comes to dialogue. I hope that this helps you guys to write excellent dialogue that's going to improve your book exponentially. And if you have any questions, you can post them down below, or if you have any other tips that I didn't touch upon, also please, you can post them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, check out my other videos, and I will see you guys next time. In the meantime, keep on writing.